The night on Astorvale had always been calm, quiet, and full of soft silver light, but everything changed when the sky split open with fire and the peaceful land turned into a battlefield without warning. One moment, Sergeant Mara Hale was walking her patrol route near the farming fields, breathing in the cool night air, and the next, alarms screamed across the entire moon as burning dropships crashed down like falling stars. These were not human ships. They belonged to the Shardclaw Raiders, tall reptilian warriors with spiked armor and glowing blue weapons, famous across the galaxy for their cruelty and hunger for anything rare or powerful. Tonight, they had come for one thing: the Lumira cub, a small glowing creature known for its bright eyes, soft silver fur, and quiet telepathic voice. The cub was special, unlike anything else, and Mara had protected it since the day it was found wandering alone near the valley stream. To her, the cub was not a prize or a tool. It was a small life that trusted her, depended on her, and deserved safety. But to the Shardclaw, the creature was priceless. They believed it carried ancient knowledge inside its mind, knowledge that could lead them to hidden star routes and secrets of great power. So they would burn down the entire moon if it meant capturing it. As fires spread across farms and houses, Mara ran through the smoke-filled fields, holding the cub tight against her chest. The cub trembled and whimpered, its mind touching hers with small frightened thoughts, telling her to leave it behind. But she refused. She promised she would never abandon it, and a promise meant everything to her. Plasma bolts flew past her, lighting the air with crackling blue lines as Shardclaw soldiers chased them, their heavy footsteps shaking the ground. Mara's armor took several hits, each blast pushing her forward, each impact making her vision blur. She dived behind a broken tractor, breathing hard, trying to shield the cub under her arms while the enemy closed in from all sides. The ground shook again when one of the raiders fired a grenade. The explosion lifted Mara off the ground and slammed her onto her back, leaving her armor smoking and cracked. She could barely move her left arm. Dust filled the air. Shadows surrounded her. The Shardclaw formed a circle, hissing with victory, their leader roaring orders in a harsh, metallic voice. She knew she could no longer escape. She curled herself over the cub, blocking the enemy's claws and guns with her body, ready to take whatever came next if it meant the cub stayed safe. The little creature felt her pain and her fear, and something inside it broke. The cub lifted its head, eyes glowing brighter than ever, and let out a cry not in sound, but in every human mind across Astorvale, a cry full of fear, love, and fury. Its voice shook every building, every ship, every sleeping person who carried even a drop of human blood. The cry echoed through every heart. Mark them all. In that single moment, every human on Astorvale felt a spark ignite inside them, a fierce instinct older than memory. Soldiers stopped retreating. Pilots turned their ships around. Farmers grabbed their tools and moved toward the fire. Mara felt the ground tremble under her as something powerful and ancient awakened across the moon. She opened her eyes, still holding the cub, and realized the battle had just begun, and this time humanity was not running. Across Astorvale, the cub's cry spread like a wave of fire through every human mind, waking something deep inside them, something fierce and unbreakable. And people who had been running only moments ago suddenly turned around with burning determination. Miners dropped their tools and picked up railguns kept for emergencies. Mechanics grabbed heavy wrenches and makeshift shields. Farmers armed themselves with hunting rifles and scrap metal armor. And pilots in damaged ships forced their engines back to life because something inside them insisted that they were not done yet. At the same time, orbiting high above, Captain Elias Rowan of the Silver Mercy felt the cry slam into his thoughts like a thunderbolt. He froze, staring out at the burning moon below, And he knew without any doubt that Mara was still alive and that the cub was calling for them. His crew saw his sudden change and waited for orders, but he didn't need to think. He ordered his ship to descend fast, ignoring warnings from engineering about the heat and stress. The Silver Mercy dove through the clouds like a falling hammer, its engines roaring, clearing a path with blasts of plasma that lit up the night. Back on the ground, Mara stood shakily in a circle of Shardclaw warriors, blood on her lips, armor cracked, but as she lifted her head, she saw bright streaks falling from the sky. Human drop pods slammed into the dirt around her in bursts of dust and fire, opening like steel flowers, releasing soldiers who stormed forward with guns blazing. They shouted her name, promising they would not let her fall. Mara pressed the cub close to her chest and forced herself to her feet, though her legs trembled with exhaustion. She felt the mark inside her now, beating like a second heart, filling her with strength she didn't understand. The Shardclaw roared and charged, but the humans were unstoppable, pushing back with a fury none of them had ever felt before. Then Captain Elias himself landed near Mara, dropping to one knee beside her, concern written all over his soot-covered face. He helped her up and joked weakly that she looked terrible, and she shoved him lightly, too tired to laugh but grateful he came. When he saw the cub, its glowing eyes filled with fear and trust, he knew this fight was no longer just about survival. It was about protection. It was about family. The cub trembled and pressed its small head against Mara's chest, sending soft ripples of emotion into the minds around it, fear, hope, and a plea for safety. Elias decided instantly that they needed to get the cub to the Skyforge station, the only place with strong enough defenses to hold off an assault this large. But the Shardclaw were not done yet. A dropship swooped down from the smoke above, firing wildly at the convoy of humans forming around Mara. She reacted without hesitation. She shoved the cub into Elias's arms and sprinted toward the dropship, diving under its fire and leaping onto its hull. With one last burst of strength, she jammed her rifle into the intake vent and fired until the weapon overheated and exploded. The ship spun wildly, smashed into a rocky cliff, and burst into flames. Elias screamed for her to return, and she ran toward the transport as it lifted off the ground. Soldiers grabbed her arms and pulled her inside as the convoy rose into the air, leaving behind burning fields, ruined homes, and echoes of the cub's powerful cry. They were not safe yet, not even close, but for the first time since the attack began, humanity was no longer running away, they were fighting back together. Bound by the same furious call, protect the cub at all costs. The human convoy lifted away from the burning valley, and as the fires of Astor Vale grew smaller below them, the weight of everything that had happened settled heavily on Mara's shoulders, though she refused to let it slow her. She sat against the transport wall, breathing hard, armor cracked in several places, each breath sharp with pain, but her eyes were always on the cub. The small creature clung to Elias now, its silver fur glowing softly as if frightened by its own power. The moment it had cried out, "Mark them all," the humans had changed. Mara had felt it in her bones, in her heartbeat, as if something ancient had awakened in her blood, and she could see traces of the same fire in the soldiers around her, eyes brighter, shoulders stronger, fear replaced with fierce purpose. Elias touched the cub's head gently, and the creature pressed its forehead to his hand, sending him a pulse of gratitude and fear. He looked at Mara and told her that they had to get the cub to Skyforge Station, the great ring of steel and engines that floated above the moon. It was the only safe place left, the last stronghold humans had in this corner of space. But when Mara stared out the transport window and saw streaks of Shardclaw ships cutting through the clouds, she knew the enemy would never let them reach it without a fight. The captain ordered the convoy to fly low, weaving between mountains and canyons, using the terrain as cover. The wind roared around the transport, carrying the smell of smoke and ash. Below them, the once peaceful fields of Astorvale were nothing but bright red flames and scattered ruins. Each destroyed home made Mara's stomach tighten, because she knew the Shardclaw would not stop until they had taken the cub or destroyed every human trying to protect it. And as if summoned by her thoughts, a Shardclaw warship dropped down from the clouds, firing heavy blasts of plasma that shook the entire convoy. Ilias shouted commands into the radio while soldiers strapped in and returned fire from the side hatches. Mara pushed herself to her feet despite the pain and took her position near the door, firing controlled bursts at the enemy ship. The cub pressed its small body against Elias, trembling at every explosion, its mind whispering fear into everyone's thoughts. Mara knew they had to move faster. She leapt from one transport to another mid-flight when power failed in the rear ship, grabbing a rope line and swinging through the air while plasma shots hissed past her. When she reached the cockpit, she helped stabilize the pilot, who was struggling to keep the damaged ship from crashing. But the sky itself seemed ready to swallow them as more Shardclaw fighters appeared, claws and wings reflecting firelight. At last, after a long stretch of chaotic flying, the convoy broke through the last thick layer of clouds, and Skyforge Station came into view, a massive steel ring with bright blue lights, floating like a giant shield above the burning world. But even from a distance, Mara could see the shimmer of explosions flashing across the station's surface. The Shardclaw were already there. The moment Elias saw it, he swore under his breath and ordered the ships to dock fast. The cub looked up at Mara with frightened eyes, and she placed her hand gently over its small head, promising that she wouldn't let anyone harm it. The promise lit another spark inside her, stronger than before. They were flying into a new battlefield, and the enemy was ready, but so were they. Humanity had been marked, and now they would answer. When the convoy finally reached Skyforge Station, it was clear that the humans had arrived not at a place of safety, but at the heart of a growing storm, because the great steel ring that floated above Astorvale was already surrounded by the Shardclaw fleet, their serrated warships glowing with dark blue light as they charged their weapons. Elias stared out the cockpit window, jaw clenched, knowing the enemy was prepared for their arrival. Still, he gave the order to enter the battle, and the sky filled with explosions as human ships fired back with everything they had. As the transport sped toward the docking bay, Mara held the cub close, feeling the small creature's fast heartbeat against her chest, and she whispered that she wasn't going to let anything happen to it. The cub didn't speak back, but it pressed its head against her armor, sending her a soft wave of emotion that felt like trust mixed with fear. Once the convoy landed inside the bay, the soldiers rushed out into the metallic corridors of the Kimbarte as in the Tordens of the Femboy. Landed inside the bay, the soldiers rushed out into the metallic corridors of the Fidi Hasomium Sasondim entered inside the bay. The soldiers rushed out into the metallic station, which already echoed with distant gunfire and the screams of metal as Shardclaw breacher pods slammed into the hull, drilling through the walls. Mara and Elias joined the front defenders near the main entrance, where sparks rained from the ceiling and the air smelled like burning circuits. Engineers worked desperately to activate the station shields, but every time they made progress, another breach pod landed, and more Shardclaw warriors poured out with razor-sharp weapons and glowing shields. Mara fought at the very front, her baton crackling with electricity, her blaster firing steady shots, even though her armor was cracked and her arms ached from earlier wounds. Elias fought beside her, shouting orders, keeping the line steady, as the Shardclaw hurled themselves forward with endless rage. Behind them, station workers, medics, and civilians tried to stay safe, but even they could feel the pressure as the wall shook again and again. The cub stayed close to Mara, its silver fur shining brighter every time she struggled or staggered. and when one Shardclaw warrior almost reached her, the cub released a sharp pulse of force that pushed the alien back just long enough for Mara to strike. She glanced at the cub, realizing its power was growing faster than she expected. The battle became a blur of smoke, fire, and shouting as wave after wave of enemies forced their way inside. Korvac, the Shardclaw leader, arrived with the next assault. He towered above his soldiers, covered in jagged armor, his burning blade humming like a living creature. The sight of him made Mara's skin tighten, but she held her ground because she knew she had no choice. Korvac roared that the cub would be his, that humanity could not stop the Shardclaw, and that their resistance was pointless. Mara spat blood, raised her baton, and answered that he would have to kill her first. The battle slammed forward again with brutal force, pushing the humans back toward the reactor level. Elias shouted that they had to hold the line or the entire station would explode, and that pushed everyone to fight harder. Even exhausted engineers grabbed tools and joined the fight. Despite their efforts, the Shardclaw kept coming. The metal floor was slick with smoke and sparks, and the humans were running out of ammo, strength, and time. Mara stumbled nearly, falling, and the cub cried out, its eyes glowing brighter than ever. It saw everything, the blood, the fear, the humans collapsing under the weight of the attack, and its tiny body shook with a deep, growing rage. Its emotions poured into Mara, filling her chest with heat, and for the first time, she felt the cub's power rising like a coming storm. The station trembled, the lights flickered, and in that moment, something inside the cub began to awaken, something old and fierce and ready to burst free. The battle was reaching its breaking point, and the cub was no longer willing to hide behind others while they suffered for its sake. The battle inside Skyforge Station had reached a point where every breath felt like a final one, and the humans were barely holding themselves upright as the Shardclaw pushed deeper, claws scraping over the steel floors and their savage roars echoing off the broken walls. While Mara stumbled backward, her body bruised and shaking, her baton flickering with only a few sparks of power left. Elias stood beside her, his armor scorched, his voice hoarse from shouting orders, yet still refusing to give even an inch as the enemy surrounded them. The station's lights flickered weakly, smoke filled the air, and every human fighter looked ready to collapse, but they kept swinging, kept firing, kept screaming in defiance because the mark inside them still burned like a stubborn flame. Korvac, tall and monstrous in his jagged armor, stepped through the haze with his glowing blade raised, his eyes focused solely on Mara and the small cub trembling behind her. He moved with slow, heavy steps, savoring the moment like a hunter closing in on wounded prey. And he told her in a cold, mocking tone that this was the end, that she had fought well, but it was time to surrender the creature he called the Starborn Key. Mara tightened her grip on her failing weapon and planted her feet firmly, knowing she barely had the strength left to stand, but refusing to bow to him. Elias tried to move in front of her, but she pushed him back with a weak shake of her head, determined to keep the cub safe until her final breath. The cub, however, was no longer the trembling little creature she had shielded in the valley. It had been watching everything, every wound, every scream. Every fallen soldier, and its small chest rose and fell with fast, frightened breaths that slowly turned into something hotter and stronger. The fear in its eyes shifted into fierce protectiveness as it looked at the humans, struggling to remain standing despite the pain tearing through their bodies. Mara didn't notice at first, her focus locked on Korvac, but the cub stepped forward, its silver fur brightening until it looked like a creature woven from living starlight. Then its mind reached into Mara's, into Elias, into every human on the station, and for a heartbeat the chaos fell silent as a single thought formed, a thought filled with grief, anger, and love. The cub lifted its head and released a cry so powerful it felt like the air itself cracked. It was not a sound but a shock wave that surged through every corridor, every broken wall, every human heart. The mental scream echoed with a fire that made every human straighten their backs and clench their fists. Mark them all! The words thundered through their minds, energizing their bones, their muscles, their spirits. A surge of strength rushed through the fighters, washing away exhaustion and fear, replacing them with fierce determination. Mara felt the pain in her body melt into raw power as she lunged forward with a speed she shouldn't have had, slamming into Korvac with everything she was. Elias roared with renewed fury and crashed into the enemy lines like a force of nature. The humans around them erupted into battle cries, smashing into the Shardclaw with unstoppable momentum. The station burst into a storm of bright gunfire, shouts, and shattering armor. In minutes, the Shardclaw formation broke. In 20 minutes, they were falling back in chaos. In 30 minutes, they were fleeing toward their ships in terror as humanity ripped through their forces with a power they had never seen. Korvac tried to fight back, bellowing commands, but Mara drove her blade into his chest, ending the battle with one final strike. As the Shardclaw fleet panicked and jumped into retreat, the humans stood bloody, tired, but unbroken, the echo of the cub's cry still burning inside them like a promise that none of them would ever forget. When the last Shardclaw ship fled into the dark of space and the echoes of battle slowly faded from the steel halls of Skyforge Station, the humans stood among broken walls and smoking floors with tired eyes and shaking bodies. But they were alive, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the station was quiet. Emergency lights glowed softly over the wreckage, and rescue teams rushed in to treat wounds, lift debris, and help survivors to safe areas. Mara walked carefully through the damaged corridor, her limbs heavy, her armor dented, but her heart lighter than it had been since the invasion began. The cub sat wrapped in her arms, its silver fur dim now, no longer burning with the blinding light from its mighty cry, but still warm and soft as it rested its head against her shoulder. Elias found her near a broken balcony railing that overlooked the calm curve of Aster Vale below, now a patchwork of smoke and glowing embers. He carried 2 metal cups of ration coffee, one of which he handed to her with a small smile. She took it with a tired laugh, feeling the faint warmth spread from her hands to her chest as she watched rescue ships move across the sky like tiny fireflies. For a moment, the world seemed peaceful again, even though both she and Elias knew that the fight they had survived was only the first of many storms that might follow. The cub lifted its head and looked between them. Its bright eyes filled with a mix of relief and worry, and it asked softly, not with a shout this time, but with a gentle whisper inside their minds, whether they were safe now. Mara stroked its fur and told it that for this moment, they were. The cub pressed closer to her, but its voice trembled as it said that there would be others who would come. Others who would want to claim its power, others who would not stop even after seeing what happened to the Shardclaw. Elias nodded, his face serious but calm, and he told the cub that if anyone came again, they would not find humans unprepared, because now humanity understood what it meant to be marked, and they were stronger for it. The cub studied his face and then Mara's, and a soft glow shimmered in its eyes, not the fierce blaze of battle, but a warm light like the glow of a small candle. Mara leaned against the railing, letting the cool air brush her face, and she felt a quiet pride fill her chest. She remembered how they had run through the burning fields, how close they had come to losing everything, and how the cub's cry had changed the hearts of every human who heard it. People all across the station were still talking about it, whispering how the cry had reached them like lightning, pushing them to fight harder, move faster, protect stronger. Even now, some walked the halls with a fire in their eyes that had not been there before, a shared understanding that something powerful connected them all. Humanity had been broken many times in the past, but this day had proven they always rose again. The cub shifted in her arms and looked out at the stars, a small spark of hope glowing inside it. And Mara could feel its thoughts forming a future full of danger, but also full of possibility. Elias sat beside them, sipping his coffee as the stars reflected off the cracked metal around them. And he said softly that the Shard Claw would tell stories of what happened here. They would speak of humans who refused to fall, humans who defended the small, humans who answered a cry with fire. Mara smiled faintly and held the cub just a little closer, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. And high above Astorvale, in the quiet after the storm, a new legend began to spread across the stars, the legend of the Marked Ones, the unbroken defenders of a tiny creature whose voice had awakened the courage of an entire species.